Previously, we witnessed the raw energy of tens of thousands rising in unison, voices piercing the thick air, drowned by the harsh echo of riot shields and baton strikes. A young student's cry for freedom was swallowed by the relentless storm of suppression. Now, the scene shifts deeper into this turmoil, where symbols of desperation and defiance challenge the iron wall of law enforcement. Further down the chaotic streets, a fragile figure emerges, a retired woman gripping a trembling cardboard sign that pleads, "Stop killing our children." Her eyes fixate on the towering line of police officers before her. They stand motionless, statuesque, as if carved by a sculptor's steady hand, unflinching and cold like machines programmed for endurance. Around her, the crowd surges. Banners litter the asphalt, some scrawled with relentless accusations, "Putin is a murderer." Amid the cacophony, a mother's wail pierces the night, mourning her son, snatched away and swallowed into the opaque silence of detention. Questions that once echoed only in the shadowed halls of power now blaze openly through the streets, unfiltered and dangerous. Whose war is this really? How much longer must ordinary Russians shoulder this unbearable burden? Peeling back the layers of propaganda reveals a stark, unforgiving reality. The Western narrative of Russians passively bearing every hardship is violently shattered. Empty supermarket shelves expose the fragility beneath the facade. Gas lines stretch endlessly, an aching symbol of scarcity and frustration. The pulse of street fury vibrates beneath heavy, smoke-thick air, furious, relentless. Impossible to ignore. For decades, a stubborn myth has endured: Russians are invincible, their patience infinite. No hardship, no state demand breaks their silence. This belief dismissed attacks on Russia's economy as futile, assuming no public unrest could ever shake Kremlin control. Yet this is not just mistaken, it is a profound distortion of Russia's history. The legacy of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union tells a violently different story. Not one of passive acceptance, but a pattern of fierce collapses, bitter resistance ignited when oppression and economic despair pushed people beyond their breaking point. The Tsarist regime did not crumble before invading armies, it fell because its own people revolted against hunger and injustice. The Soviet Union did not dissolve suddenly, its economic collapse emptied shelves and shattered the people's trust in the system's very foundation. These upheavals were forged in the slow burn between official grand narratives and the cold, empty pots on kitchen stoves. The widening gap between illusion and reality fueled a fire that would not be extinguished. Leaders in Moscow understand this truth intimately. The Kremlin's relentless propaganda machinery, the censorship, the branding of dissenters as enemies, the imprisonment of voices of truth, it is not a sign of strength. It is a confession of fear. The regime's need to fracture society, isolate individuals, to terrorize the collective into submission reveals a fundamental dread, the uncontrollable power of united defiance. But even the Kremlin cannot fully conceal the growing cracks. Ukraine's bold campaign to strike deep infrastructure, fuel depots, refineries, railway lines, was designed not to deliver a single knockout blow but to shatter the Kremlin's carefully managed illusion. To transform the war's toll from abstract numbers into crushing, tangible hardships that ordinary Russians feel in their daily lives. A refinery fire remains a flickering newsblip until the gas station closes and drivers wait hours in lines under the biting cold, a ration card allowing only 2 liters per day. Then, it is no longer news, it is personal, immediate, suffocating. Drone attacks closing airports seem distant events until business trips are cancelled indefinitely and family reunions stall in endless limbo. A winter blackout feels like a distant statistic until your home plunges into icy darkness, your breath visible in the freezing air. Each hit chips away at the Kremlin's claim: sanctions don't harm us, Europe freezes without Russian energy. Frustration festers into rage, and rage into the piercing question: who truly pays for this war? Meanwhile, official propaganda pushes illusions of growth, rising wages, and defiance of Western pressure. The reality tells another story. Even executives at the state's largest financial institutions no longer hide the truth. The economy is in recession. Interest rates soar above 14%, well beyond the threshold needed for recovery. Inflation officially hovers around 9%, but for everyday families, the price of basic foods has surged by nearly half. In poorer regions, survival means spending nearly half a meager monthly income of roughly $400 on food alone. Heating and rent devour most of the rest, forcing families to choose between warmth and nourishment. A sudden fuel price spike or medical emergency can shatter this fragile balance. In major cities, where salaries are higher, the crisis still gnaws quietly. Gone are the imported goods and Western brands, replaced by expensive, poor substitutes. Delays in medical supplies, shortages of critical drugs for diseases like cancer, and perpetual flight cancellations deepen the sense of suffocation. The middle class's once comfortable expectations of stability crumble. Faced with this mounting pressure, the state applies more control, more fear. Social payments are increased, defense industries swell artificially. Soldiers' high pay offers brief, fragile relief to their families. But this is akin to sugarcoating a decaying problem. When these reserves run dry, hyperinflation and collapse will come thunderously. Already, whispers from within the Kremlin hint at cuts to the military budget next year. If economic growth were real, such threats would be unnecessary. Tightened border controls and draconian laws branding any dissent as treason reveal the regime's deepest fear: collective defiance and mass disobedience. The wave of patriotism claimed during mobilization is a fragile veneer over widespread unrest. What happens when the unyielding spirit of the streets is no longer silenced? How long can this pressure cooker hold before the entire system bursts apart? The answer lingers in the frozen breaths of waiting crowds, in the trembling hands of older women, in the sharp crack of batons against shields. The story is far from over. Previously we saw how a foreign army never broke through Moscow. Instead, the people rose against hunger and injustice. The Soviet collapse came when the economy failed, shelves emptied, and trust vanished. Those breaks did not happen in a single night. What if the Kremlin's own fear is louder than its artillery? The regime's massive propaganda machine is not a badge of strength, it is a confession of deep weakness. If a nation were truly loyal, why would speech be banned, critics labeled as spies, and dissenters locked away for years? The authorities act because they dread collective power enough to crush it completely. Now, consider the hidden truths Ukraine has forced into the open. Over the past year, strikes on deep energy sites, oil refineries, fuel depots, and rail lines have ripped the fragile propaganda veil. The aim is not a sudden regime change but to pull the war's cost out of sterile spreadsheets and plant it into every Russian's daily life. The plan works, startlingly well. A refinery blaze appears as a distant news flicker until you stand in an 8-hour gasoline line, ration card in hand, limited to 2 liters. At that moment, the fire becomes your personal nightmare. Drone attacks shutter an airport, a press release turns into a cancelled business trip. Your flight to family stretches into an endless delay, and the shutdown embeds itself in your routine. Imagine the stench of pepper spray mingling with winter's bitter chill, sirens wailing above crowds clutching banners that scream Putin, stop the war. A retired woman trembles, holding a cardboard plea, stop killing our children. Police in rigid formation block her, their faces as cold as sculpted stone. The streets echo with a student's shout for freedom, smothered by batons striking shields. A mother cries for her detained son, her voice lost in the chaos. Who truly pays for this war, and how long will the price rise? The next scene reveals the economy's hidden fracture. Official reports claim growth, yet inflation spikes, food prices soar by 40 to 50%, and families scrape together pennies for heating. When the last candle sputters, will the people finally tear down the wall of lies? As winter rears its icy head, the toll of conflict becomes painfully personal. A power plant's destruction might just be another statistic until the chill creeps into your home, leaving you in darkness. It's experiences like these, one after another, that explode the myth the regime tries to sell, that everything is fine. Messages from the Kremlin claim that sanctions are ineffective and that life continues to flourish. But in stark contrast to the narrative, the reality on the ground speaks a far more heartbreaking tale. Amid soaring prices, discontent simmers. Despite state-sponsored claims of economic growth, even leaders of major banks like Sberbank are forced to acknowledge troubling truths. German Gref, Sberbank's CEO, stated that the base interest rate could reach 14% by year-end, but is this enough for recovery? His response betrays an anxious caution: it isn't. He hints that significant recovery won't occur until the rate drops to 12%, a daunting prospect for already struggling families. The impact of stagnation is staggering. While official inflation hovers around 8 to 9%, the price of essential goods like bread, eggs, and chicken have shot up by nearly 50%. In impoverished regions, families scrape by on monthly incomes of just $400, spending nearly half just to feed themselves. After covering rent and heating, they might find themselves with a mere $50 left to make it through the month. The pressures mount. What happens when gasoline prices suddenly spike? What if an unexpected medical cost arises? In those moments, trivial choices vanish. Instead, families face gut-wrenching decisions. Is it worth the warmth of the heater tonight, or should they skip yet another meal? In Russia's larger cities, while salaries appear higher, the tentacles of crisis reach deep, suffocating lives in different yet equally painful ways, where foreign products have vanished, replaced by overpriced local alternatives. Medical delays have become a norm, especially for those needing specialized care. This pervasive discontent fundamentally shatters hopes and expectations for many, triggering a growing sense of desperation. The government clings to a patchwork of social payments, desperately trying to extinguish the flames of discontent. Yet, as they pour money into military endeavors, these artificial lifelines can't mask the growing crisis. With each military budget cut announcement, the state reveals its true anxieties, a signal of the unrealized reality looming on the horizon. What now? As pressure builds within society, remember, the Kremlin's strategy minimizes the collective power of the populace. They fear the rise of dissenting voices, the call for action against oppression. In the shadows, they know the truth: a society pushed too far will eventually rise. How long can they hold the dam before the flood breaks loose? The ticking clock of change grows louder each passing day. What if the price of a single liter of gasoline jumped so high overnight that every ruble you saved for food, heat, and your children's medicine vanished in an instant? Imagine the scent of burning diesel mixing with winter's cold, the sound of distant sirens echoing through empty streets, and the unsettling feeling that the fragile balance you once trusted has shattered. How long can a nation survive such a shock? Yesterday's summary: a family eked out a living on a $400 monthly income. Nearly half went to food, the rest drained by heating and rent, leaving just $50100 to stretch until the month's end. Now, a sudden surge in fuel costs or an unexpected medical bill can topple that precarious budget. The margin disappears, and life shifts from minor annoyances to painful choices. Do you turn down the heater, or skip the next meal? The question repeats, relentless, like a drumbeat in a cold hallway. In Moscow and St. Petersburg, wages are higher, offering a thin layer of resilience. Yet the crisis seeps through glittering avenues, contaminating every market stall. Imported goods have vanished or now cost a fortune. Western brands are replaced by cheap, low-quality copies that break after a few uses. Pharmacies run low on essential medicines, especially those needed for serious illnesses such as cancer. Airports close repeatedly, grounding flights and isolating families. Service quality crumbles in every sector, from plumbing to public transport. This erosion shakes the middle class's belief in stability. The government tries to douse the flames with targeted cash aid and massive spending on defense. The war drains the economy on one side while spawning artificial prosperity in towns that host arms factories. Soldiers receive high salaries, offering brief relief to their families. But this model resembles a patient kept alive on a flood of sugar. Once the sugar runs out, the body collapses. Bank executives now admit the economy has slipped into a technical recession. Inflation officially hovers near 8%, yet the price of basic food items has jumped 40 to 50%. A modest basket of essentials, bread, eggs, chicken, now feels like a luxury. In poorer regions, a household earning $400 must allocate half to food, then spend the remainder on heat and rent, leaving barely enough for a single bus fare. A sudden rise in gasoline prices or an urgent medical expense can wipe out that last sliver of hope. What will happen when the state's reserves dry up and hyperinflation erupts? The Kremlin has already hinted at possible cuts to the military budget next year, an admission that the economy is far from booming. As economic and social pressure mounts, the regime's only response appears to be tightening control, amplifying fear, and demanding obedience. The exodus of educated young people early in the conflict revealed the regime's deepest dread: collective action and open defiance. To halt the brain drain, border controls hardened, and dissent was branded treason. But can such repression contain the growing roar of a population pushed to the brink? Cliffhanger: as the streets grow louder and the cold wind carries more than just frost. Will the next government-issued payment be enough to keep families afloat, or will the accumulating pressures finally ignite a fire the authorities cannot extinguish? A chilling question haunts us: what if the mightiest regime is shaking in its own darkness? Brief recap: the Kremlin has hinted that next year's military budget may shrink. If the economy truly thrived, such warnings would be unnecessary. Under growing pressure, the state tightens its grip, spraying more control and fear. Hundreds of thousands of educated youths fled the country as the war began. Their exodus exposed the regime's deepest dread, people acting together and refusing orders. In response, authorities slammed shut borders and passed draconian laws that labeled dissent as treason. The conscription drive revealed the same terror. If patriotism ran deep, officials would not need to tempt soldiers with sky-high wages, deceptive contracts, or brutal coercion. In big cities, forced drafts risk street uprisings that could explode without warning. Instead, the government buys compliance in affluent areas and forces the countryside and impoverished villages to bear the heaviest costs. This is not confidence, it is risk management born of dread. Even the elite feel the chill. Oligarchs, generals, and senior bureaucrats die under mysterious circumstances. Frequent, ruthless pruning of the inner circle signals power struggles, not stability. Fear breeds mistakes, internal friction, and relentless paranoia. These observations are not a prophecy of a massive storming of the Kremlin tomorrow. They simply show that repression works, yet universal laws still apply. Denial gives way to complaints, then anger, and finally to raging fury. The Kremlin can delay each stage, but it cannot erase it. Change in Russia may not erupt in grand street battles. It could emerge quietly, as local officials begin to ignore orders, letting the cracks widen from within. Will the silent defiance of countless bureaucrats finally tip the balance, shattering the illusion of unbreakable power? In the heart of Russia, a profound transformation is underway, a quiet storm brewing beneath the seemingly calm surface. As regional leaders begin prioritizing the needs of their own people over the distant dictates of Moscow, a subtle shift in power is taking shape. The once unbreakable chains of loyalty and obedience that have held the regime together for so long are slowly fraying. Despite the facade of strength, the Kremlin finds itself increasingly isolated. History has taught us that empires can crumble. Look at the fall of the Soviet Union. Each collapse comes after a prolonged period of stability, a time when people dismiss change as impossible. Yet, just before the shift occurs, that very impossibility seems to dissolve. Can it be that Ukraine's strategic moves do not rely on miraculous interventions but on the inevitable decay inherent in oppressive systems? This relentless pressure on Russia's war economy and its control mechanisms is revealing vulnerabilities masked by bravado. As these cracks grow, the belief in the regime weakens, and compliance wanes. The ruler who presents himself as omnipotent may eventually face the sobering truth: the organic resistance of his own people could be the most formidable force he encounters. This realization doesn't arrive out of the blue, it creeps in like a slow-acting poison, subtly undermining trust and cohesion. Today, Russia grapples with a gradual yet profound dissolution, silently infiltrating the core of both the state and society. It's not merely about the chaos erupting in city streets, it represents the unraveling of the invisible threads: loyalty, fear, and the insidious indifference that have long empowered the Kremlin. More than missiles or military might, it's the apathy of the masses that has sustained this regime, keeping everyday life just tolerable enough to avoid revolt. With each passing moment, the facade wears thinner. When ordinary lives are so precarious, the weight of even minor changes can become unbearable. When chaos in the streets becomes a regular soundscape, it rattles the very foundation upon which the regime has relied. As these layers of compliance erode, the unquestioning silence that once prevailed may give way to a chorus of dissent. The question is, how long can this slow burn continue before it ignites into a flame? And so, as we watch the landscape shift, we must ask ourselves, can change be welcomed before it's forced upon us? The battle within is often tougher and more complex than any external conflict, a fight for the heart and soul of a nation that has long been held captive. Will those who once turned a blind eye awaken to reclaim their voices, or will they continue to quietly endure until the point of no return? Until now, the Kremlin's unspoken pact with its people was simple: keep life predictable and bearable, and in return, the state would mostly leave you alone. For a quarter century, this fragile balance held steady. Citizens tolerated censorship and control because they still found moments of stability, small perks of prosperity. But everything changed when Ukraine struck deep into Russia's energy heart. Those strikes shattered the cornerstone of the deal, the guarantee of a familiar, tolerable life. Today, daily existence haunts with uncertainty. The hum of long gas lines, the stale scent of empty store shelves, and the sharp bite of despair hang heavy in the air. What started as whispered doubts in dim kitchens exploded into simmering discontent on social media and now echoes through corridors of power. Even those tasked with holding the system together, bureaucrats, regional governors, security officials, are questioning the cost of loyalty. When obeying Moscow becomes more dangerous than defiance, when the leader you once trusted becomes a threat to your survival, a silent rebellion takes root. It's not loud or flashy. It's a slow, grinding resistance. Some shuffle paperwork. Others delay decisions. Many soften enforcement of Moscow's harsh demands. They quietly put local interests before distant orders. In a machine fueled by relentless top-down pressure, these small acts are deadly. Like grains of sand jamming its gears, first slowing, then creaking, and finally halting the entire system. Regional governors, once powerful lords of their Kremlin-funded realms, are trapped by impossible equations. Their kingdoms crumble as federal subsidies vanish, local economies collapse, and public fury rises. They balance precariously between Moscow's demands for more troops and factories, and the explosive anger growing in the streets. The question now is unavoidable: how long before these cracks fracture the very foundations of power? And when the machine finally stalls, will it spark an unstoppable uprising? Previously, we explored how regional governors, once loyal administrators of their own territories backed by Kremlin funds, now find themselves trapped in an impossible balancing act. Moscow's orders clash painfully with the realities at home. Now, imagine a governor staring down a brutal choice. On one side, relentless demands from the capital: build more military factories, send waves of young men to the front lines, keep the spirits of the people alive despite the hardships. On the other side, federal subsidies dry up, local economies crumble, and growing resentment simmers dangerously in the streets. Does he order the last remaining factory in his region to switch to tank production, knowing it will cost hundreds their jobs? Or does he quietly allow it to continue making civilian goods and keep families afloat? Does he push harder to mobilize more soldiers or slow down recruitment, fearing backlash from angry neighbors? This tense hesitation is spreading. More governors choose subtle resistance, not an open revolt, but a quiet struggle for survival. They understand something Moscow doesn't: their power here is fragile. The Kremlin's control is temporary, but the fury of their own citizens is immediate and permanent. So, these leaders meticulously obey the Kremlin on paper but prioritize their own fragile regional balances in practice. This avoidance signals a fragile unraveling of Russia's centralized control. When every region starts looking out only for itself, what does federation even mean anymore? But the cracks go deeper than governors. Inside the sprawling machinery of the state bureaucracy, thousands of faceless officials are doing their own calculus. Why risk everything to speed a shipment of banned technology through customs? Why approve a questionable bank transfer just because the Kremlin demands it? Why reorder a military convoy ahead of a civilian food train and risk stoking local anger? The gears of this vast system are grinding to a halt, not by rebellion, but by widespread silence and subtle subversion. As mistrust spreads, loyalty fractures, and Moscow's grip weakens, the nation edges closer to a breaking point no one can predict. What happens when an entire bureaucracy quietly says, "No, not like this"? Who will be left to hold the pieces together? In the last part, we saw how ordinary people are pushed to the edge by rising hardships, while officials face impossible choices. Should a customs officer risk everything to speed critical technology through sanctions? Why would a bank manager approve a suspicious Kremlin transaction? And why must a railroad chief prioritize military convoys over civilian food trains? These questions reveal a deeper fracture. The social contract is shredded, and trust in the state is disappearing fast. Quiet acts of defiance grow as people struggle to survive. Now, imagine a system where loyalty no longer guarantees safety. When even the highest ranks tremble with uncertainty, every official weighs risks in isolation. The safest choice becomes inaction, avoiding decisions, passing the buck, letting everything slow to a crawl. When a refinery lies broken for weeks, not because of broken machinery but because thousands of bureaucrats refuse to take chances. This paralysis spreads like a virus through the machinery of the state, freezing every vital function in place. Fear grips even the Kremlin's innermost halls. Secret purges, sudden deaths, whispers of betrayal ripple through the elite, breeding paranoia. No one trusts their neighbor. Each suspects dossiers hidden in shadowy offices, submitted to the secret police. Rational plans vanish. Power struggles dictate decisions, not the nation's welfare. The government no longer acts like a cohesive state. Instead, it resembles a collapsing mafia family on the brink of ruin. Meanwhile, ordinary people endure the fallout. The fake energy derived from pumping money into weapons doubles as a grim symbol of exhaustion. When price controls fall and subsidies dry up, currency value crashes. Shoppers crowd store aisles, but only to stare at empty shelves or prices that mock their shrinking wallets. Wages appear higher in official reports, but real buying power plunges deeper every day. The illusion shatters, millions realize they have become poor overnight. This grinding, invisible pressure doesn't explode immediately. The Kremlin's walls won't be stormed next week. But behind the silence, tension mounts. The cracks spread wider than anyone dares to admit. What happens when fear kills initiative at the very core of power? When the system meant to protect starts to suffocate? The question lingers, can this fragile order hold, or is a complete breakdown inevitable? In recent times, the fragile bond between the state and its citizens has reached a breaking point. The trust that once held society together is now fraying like an old thread. People are not merely discontent, they are beginning to take action. Small, desperate acts of defiance are becoming more common. Individuals are resorting to the black market for essential goods like fuel, confronting local authorities with complaints, and clashing with employers over overdue wages. There's a groundswell of frustration echoing through social media platforms, where anonymous voices amplify their grievances. But these measures, while significant, do not seem poised to topple the regime just yet. However, they are creating an undercurrent of unrest that is impossible to ignore. Every small act of resistance contributes to rising tensions and complicates governance for the state. Rather than being held together by trust and agreement, society finds itself glued by force and constant surveillance. This heavy-handed approach is taking its toll, not only on the citizens but also on the state itself, as it becomes increasingly costly and exhausting to maintain control. As this crisis deepens, what next steps will the people take? Will their mounting frustrations lead to a larger movement, or will the oppressive tactics of the state succeed in silencing them? The stakes are higher than ever, as both the government and its citizens prepare for an uncertain future filled with tension and unpredictability. In the shadows of Moscow's towering architecture, where despair and hope intertwine. One question reverberates: how much longer will the people endure before their simmering discontent reaches a boiling point? The answer lies in the hands of the very individuals who have been pushed to the edge, and the world will be watching closely.